They tell you the exchange rate in numbers, pesos to dollars, dollars to pesos. But they never tell you about the other exchange rate. The one where your dignity costs more every single month, where your pride becomes a luxury you can't afford, where you watch yourself shrink in her eyes peso by peso, until you're not a man anymore, just a currency problem she's trying to solve. If you've ever felt the ground shift beneath a promise you believed in, hit that like button and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And what's the one thing you wish you'd known sooner? This story was shared with us by a retired Australian who reached out through email. He didn't want his real name used, but he said maybe his mistake could help someone else avoid the math he never saw coming. I landed in Cebu 3 months before everything started making sense. Not the good kind of sense. The kind where you realize the numbers you've been trusting are built on sand. My Australian pension was converting to roughly 85,000 pesos every month. I'd done the research, spent weeks on expat forums, talked to guys who'd been living here for years. Everyone said the same thing. Live smart, avoid Manila prices, stay out of the tourist traps, and you can have a decent life on $1,500 USD a month. Better than decent, actually. Back in Brisbane, that pension barely covered rent in a dodgy suburb. Here it felt like wealth. I had a 1-bedroom condo in a good building, air conditioning, a gym downstairs I actually used. I ate out when I wanted. I didn't check prices at the grocery store. For the first time since my divorce ate half my savings 5 years ago, I felt like I could breathe. I met Maricel at a coffee shop near Ayala Mall. I wasn't looking for anyone. I was just sitting there with my laptop, trying to figure out the Philippine tax system for foreigners, getting increasingly frustrated with government websites that didn't load properly. She was at the next table, typing on her phone, and she looked over when I swore under my breath. "Tax problems?" she asked, smiling. Her English was perfect. No accent I could detect. I laughed and said something about bureaucracy being the same in every country. We started talking. She worked at a call center, night shift mostly, handling customer service for an American telecom company. She was smart, funny, quick with observations about the cultural differences she dealt with daily. She made me laugh. When I left an hour later, I had her number. Within 2 weeks, we were dating. Within a month, she was staying at my condo 4 nights a week. She had her own place, a small apartment she shared with 2 other girls closer to her work, but she preferred my place. It was quieter, she said, more private. I felt lucky. I was 62, divorced, carrying an extra 20 kilos I couldn't seem to lose, and here was this beautiful 28-year-old woman who seemed genuinely interested in my stories about carpentry work back in Australia, who laughed at my jokes, who curled up against me at night like I was someone worth holding on to. The math still made sense. My pension covered rent, utilities, food, entertainment, and even gifts for her. Small things, a new phone case, dinner at nice restaurants, a necklace I saw her looking at in a mall window. I wasn't wealthy, but I was comfortable. That was more than I'd been in Australia for years. 4 months in, Maricel mentioned her younger brother needed school tuition. She brought it up casually, almost apologetically, while we were having breakfast at my place. "My mom called last night," she said, stirring her coffee. "My brother's tuition is due next week. 15,000 pesos. She didn't ask directly. She just stated it like a fact, something weighing on her mind. I asked how her family usually handled it. She shrugged, said they'd figure it out. Maybe her mum could borrow from a neighbor, maybe her aunt could help. The way she said it, so resigned, so tired, it hit something in me. I was sitting there with 85,000 pesos landing in my account every month, and her family was scrambling to find $270 USD for school. I told her I'd cover it. I pulled out my wallet and handed her the cash right there. The way her face changed, the gratitude, the relief, the way she hugged me and called me her hero, I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. It felt better than good. It felt like I mattered again. Like I was someone who could fix things, protect someone, provide. Back in Brisbane, I was just another divorced pensioner barely scraping by. Here I was a provider. That's how it started. A week later, her mother needed medicine for her blood pressure, 3,000 pesos. 2 weeks after that, her cousin's motorcycle broke down and he needed it for work, 8,000 pesos for repairs. Then there was a family emergency back in their province. Her grandmother was sick, and they needed money for hospital bills. pesos. Each request was small. Each request was reasonable. Each request had a face, a name, a genuine need behind it. I started keeping a mental tally, but I stopped after a few weeks because it made me feel cheap, like I was counting favors. Maricel never demanded anything. She just shared her family's problems with me, and I offered solutions. By month 6, I was spending an extra 25,000 to 30,000 pesos monthly on her family's needs. The math still worked, though it was tighter. I justified it as investment in our future. She talked about us building a small house together someday, maybe in her family's province where land was cheap. She mentioned starting a business, maybe a small sari-sari store her mother could run. I pictured growing old here with someone who cared about me, surrounded by her family, integrated into a community. The peso was holding steady at around 56 to the dollar. Everything was manageable. I told myself I was being smart about it. Month 8 brought the first real shock, though I didn't recognize it as a shock at the time. The peso hit 58 to the dollar. I noticed it when I went to withdraw cash from the ATM. My usual 40,000 peso withdrawal, which used to cost me around $650 USD, now cost nearly $700. It was a small difference, $50. I barely registered it. But then I checked my banking app and saw the conversion rate listed there, 58.2 pesos to the dollar. I'd gotten used to seeing it in the mid-50s. This felt wrong, like someone had changed the rules without telling me. By month 10, the rate was 59.5. My monthly pension, which used to convert to 85,000 pesos, now came out to about 82,000. I mentioned it to Maricel one evening while we were watching TV. "The exchange rate's going up," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "My pension doesn't stretch as far as it used to." She glanced at me, then back at the screen. "Everything's getting more expensive here too," she said. "Electricity bills went up. Rice prices went up. My jeepney fare to work increased." She wasn't wrong. I'd noticed the grocery bills creeping higher. But her tone, it was dismissive. Like my concern was trivial, like I was complaining about nothing. I wanted to explain that it wasn't nothing. That a 5% reduction in my purchasing power meant I had 3,000 pesos less every month. But I didn't. I just nodded and went back to watching TV. I started checking the exchange rate every morning. It became a small ritual, a habit I couldn't break. I'd wake up, make coffee, open the currency app on my phone and stare at the number. 59.8, then 60.1, then 60.3. Each tick upward felt personal, like the universe was conspiring against me. Other expats in my Facebook groups were complaining too. Some were talking about moving to Vietnam or Thailand, where their dollars still stretched further. One guy posted that he was going back to the States because the Philippines wasn't worth it anymore. The comments on his post were split. Some guys calling him smart, others calling him a quitter. I didn't comment. I didn't want to move. I was invested here now, emotionally and financially. Maricel was talking about her family's house needing a new roof. The estimate was 80,000 pesos. She showed me photos of the damage. Rusted tin panels, holes where rain came through, her mother's bedroom floor soaked after every storm. I told her I'd think about it. But inside I was doing the math. 80,000 pesos used to be about $400 USD. Now it was closer to $1,330, and that was nearly 2 months of what used to be my discretionary spending. I didn't know how to say no without sounding like I didn't care about her family. The peso crossed 60, then 61, then settled at 62 like it was taunting me. My pension now yielded only 78,000 pesos. I sat down one night and wrote everything out on paper. Rent, 28,000. Utilities, 4,000. Food, which used to cost me 15,000 monthly, was now running closer to 18,000 because prices were inflating across the board. Phone bill, 1,500. Internet, 2,000. Transportation, 3,000. That left me with 21,500 pesos. Except it didn't, because Maricel's family needs hadn't decreased. They'd increased. I was still spending 25,000 to 30,000 pesos monthly on various emergencies and requests. The math didn't work anymore. I was operating at a deficit. Maricel stopped asking for money directly. She'd gotten smarter about it, or maybe just more tired. Instead, she sighed. She mentioned problems in passing. "My brother's tuition is due. Again next week, she'd say while scrolling through her phone, not looking at me. My mom's worried about how they'll pay for it. Then silence, just silence, and the unspoken expectation hanging in the air. She grew quiet when bills came up. The shift was subtle, but devastating. I started saying no, gently at first. I can't cover the full amount this time, but maybe I can help with half. Her response was always understanding on the surface. So of course, don't worry about it. But her warmth cooled. She stayed over less frequently. When she did visit, there was distance in her eyes, a calculation I recognized but refused to name. I suggested we cut back together. Maybe we cook at home more, I said one evening. Skip the weekend trips to the beach, just for a few months until things stabilize. She agreed. She said it made sense, but her enthusiasm was gone. She used to light up when I suggested going out. Now she just nodded, checked her phone, asked if we could just stay in and watch Netflix. One night, I was scrolling through Facebook and saw photos of her at an expensive restaurant I knew I hadn't taken her to. The place was on the waterfront, one of those spots where a meal for two costs 3,000 pesos easy. She was smiling in the photos, sitting across from other girls I didn't recognize. When I asked about it the next day, she said it was a work celebration. One of the girls got promoted. We all chipped in. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe everything was fine, that we were just going through a rough patch, that the exchange rate would stabilize and everything would go back to normal. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. She was measuring me now, calculating whether I was still worth the effort. I started tracking every peso I spent. I created a spreadsheet, color-coded and obsessive, with categories for everything. Rent, utilities, food, transportation, medical costs, phone bills, insurance, and a separate category for Maricel's family contributions. I went back through my bank statements for the past year and entered every transaction. The numbers didn't lie. I'd been spending between 95,000 and 105,000 pesos monthly, more than my pension, even at the old exchange rate. I'd been dipping into my savings without fully registering it. I'd told myself it was temporary, that the peso would stabilize, that Maricel's family emergencies would eventually stop. They hadn't stopped. They'd become routine. My savings account, which had $18,000 USD when I arrived in the Philippines, now had $11,000. In 14 months, I'd burned through $7,000. At this rate, I'd be completely broke in less than 2 years. The realization hit me at 2 a.m., sitting in my dark condo, staring at my laptop screen with the spreadsheet glowing in front of me. I wasn't building a future here. I was funding a slow-motion financial collapse. I wasn't investing in a relationship. I was paying rent on a fantasy. I tried to talk to Maricel about it the next evening. I showed her the spreadsheet, walked her through the numbers. I can't keep doing this, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. The exchange rate has killed my purchasing power. I'm spending more than I make. My savings are disappearing. She looked at the spreadsheet for maybe 5 seconds, then looked at me. So you're saying you're poor now? The way she said it, flat, almost contemptuous, it hit me harder than any accusation. I'm saying we need to be careful, I said. We need to budget, work together. She stood up. I need to go. That was it. No discussion, no problem solving, no partnership, just withdrawal. She left. An hour later, I got a text. I need 5,000 for my mum's medicine. It's urgent. I stared at the message for 10 minutes. Then I transferred the money. I hated myself for it. I hated that I couldn't say no. I hated that her tears, real or performed, had more power over me than my own financial survival. The exchange rate nightmare accelerated. The peso crashed past 63, then 64, then settled at 65 to the dollar like a knife in my chest. My $1,500 pension now converted to just 73,500 pesos. After rent and utilities, I had 41,500 left for an entire month. Food, transportation, medical needs, and any help for Maricel's family, all of it had to come from 40,500 pesos. It wasn't enough. I started making cuts. I stopped buying imported foods. No more Australian cheese, no more real coffee, no more breakfast cereal that reminded me of home. I ate rice and local fish. I bought vegetables from the wet market instead of the grocery store. I walked everywhere I could instead of taking grab cars. I cancelled my gym membership. I stopped going to air-conditioned cafes to work on my laptop. Maricel noticed. She didn't say anything directly, but her visits became transactional in a way that gutted me. She'd arrive around 7 p.m., accept whatever money I'd prepared for her in an envelope, usually 3,000 or 5,000 pesos for whatever her family's current emergency was, then stay for an hour before finding a reason to leave. The affection was gone. The warmth, the laughter, the physical intimacy, it all disappeared like it had never been real. One evening I worked up the courage to ask her something I'd been thinking about for weeks. "You have a job," I said carefully. "You make 22,000 pesos a month. Maybe you could help contribute sometimes? To dinners, to dates?" The silence that followed was crushing. Then she laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was bitter, short, cruel. "Are you serious right now?" "I'm just saying we could be a team," I said. "Share expenses, that's what couples do." "I make 22,000 pesos a month, Graham." She said my name like it was an insult. "After I send money to my family, I have almost nothing left. I thought being with a foreigner meant I wouldn't have to worry about money anymore. I thought you could provide some security, some stability, a better life. Instead, I'm with a broke old man who can't even take me out for a decent dinner." The words were designed to hurt, and they did. They carved into me and stayed there. "I'm not broke," I said, but my voice was weak. "I'm just being careful." "You're cheap," she said. "You changed. You're not the man I met." She grabbed her bag and walked out. I sat there on my couch for maybe an hour, staring at nothing, feeling like I'd been gutted. She texted me 3 days later, just one line. "I think we should take a break." I responded immediately. "Can we talk about this?" She didn't reply. I checked her Facebook the next day. Her relationship status had changed to single. By the end of the week, I saw photos of her with another foreigner. He was older than me, white-haired, overweight, smiling like an idiot with his arm around her at a beach resort, a resort I'd never been able to afford. I started noticing things I'd been too distracted to see before. The British guy from my building, a retired teacher named Paul who I'd have beers with sometimes, he was gone. His condo was empty, the furniture sold off or given away. I asked the security guard what happened. "He go back to England," the guard said. "Cannot afford here anymore." The American who used to drink at the same bar as me, a guy named Rick, who'd been here for 6 years, he'd relocated to Vietnam. I saw his Facebook post about it. "Cebu broke me financially. Trying Da Nang for a while. Better exchange rate." The German who gave me advice when I first arrived, who told me which malls were safe and which neighborhoods to avoid. He was living in a rural province now, in a nipa hut without air conditioning, basically off-grid. He posted photos of his new life like it was an adventure, but I could see the desperation in the captions. Simple living, back to basics, rediscovering what matters. The expat community was thinning. Those who remained looked tired, older, quietly desperate. I started eating at cheaper places, little carinderia stalls where you could get a meal for 60 pesos. That's where I met Doug. He was Canadian, 68, sitting alone at a plastic table, eating rice and adobo from a styrofoam container. I recognized something in his posture, the slump of defeat, the exhaustion of surviving. I asked if I could join him. He gestured to the empty seat. "You're new," he said. It wasn't a question. "1.5 years," I said. "Australian. How's the pension holding up?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. He nodded like he understood. "That bad, huh?" "The exchange rate's killing me," I said. "You and everyone else," Doug said. "I've been here 9 years. My pension used to make me comfortable. Now I share a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 other pensioners just to split the rent. I eat street food most days. Haven't had a steak in 3 years. You ever think about going back?" I asked. "To Canada?" He laughed, sharp and bitter. "Can't afford the flight. Even if I could, what's waiting for me there? My pension goes even less far in Canada than it does here. At least here it's warm. What about your girlfriend?" I asked. He gave me a look. "You got one of those too, huh?" "Had," I said. Past tense. They all leave when the money stops, Doug said. He wasn't being cruel, just stating a fact. My girl left me 2 years ago, found a younger expat with a bigger pension. I see her sometimes around the mall. She pretends she doesn't recognize me. I wanted to argue with him to say it wasn't always about money, that some relationships here were real, but I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. The Philippines isn't for broke foreigners, Doug said, finishing his meal. It's for rich tourists and working professionals. If you're just a pensioner and the exchange rate goes bad, you're fucked. Doesn't matter how good you are, how loyal, how kind you were. Numbers don't care about your character. I knew he was right. I was living proof. I spent weeks wrestling with the decision. Staying meant watching my savings drain away. Living on a budget that got tighter every month. Aging alone in a country where I was increasingly invisible without money. Going back to Australia meant admitting failure, facing my daughter who warned me not to come here, reconnecting with friends who'd think I was an idiot. Both options felt like defeat. I created another spreadsheet, this one comparing the cost of living in Brisbane versus staying in Cebu. In Brisbane, my pension would cover a small studio apartment in a western suburb. Maybe $320 a week for rent, leaving me with about $100 a month for everything else. No travel, no luxuries, no eating out. Just survival. But stable survival. Predictable poverty. In Cebu, if the peso stayed at 65 or climbed higher, I was looking at the same grinding poverty, but without Medicare, without my support network, without understanding how the culture really worked. I could speak basic Tagalog, but I'd never truly be part of this place. I was always going to be an outsider. The math was brutal either way, but at least in Australia my poverty would be in my own language. The dream I'd bought into, retire cheap in paradise, find love, live well on a modest pension, it was always contingent on the exchange rate staying favorable. When that changed, the entire illusion collapsed. I wasn't the man Maricel wanted. I wasn't even the man I thought I was. I was just a number, $500 USD, and when that number's purchasing power evaporated, so did everything I'd built on it. I started looking at flights. Maricel messaged me out of nowhere. It had been 3 weeks since I'd seen her, 5 weeks since she'd changed her status to single. Her message was casual, friendly even. Hey, Graham, I've been thinking about you. I miss you. Maybe we were both too harsh. Can we talk? My heart lifted despite myself. Despite everything I'd learned, despite the spreadsheets and the math and Doug's words echoing in my head, I wanted to believe she'd realized what we had was real. I suggested meeting at a mall food court. Neutral territory, budget-friendly. When she arrived, I barely recognized her. She looked good. She'd done something different with her hair. She was wearing makeup, a nice dress, perfume I could smell from across the table. She looked expensive in a way she'd never looked with me. We sat down and she smiled at me. The smile I remembered from when we first met. How have you been? She asked. Managing, I said. You? It's been hard, she said. I made a mistake. She reached across the table and touched my hand. My stupid, hopeful heart jumped. I missed you, she said. I missed us. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. Small talk, surface level catching up. Then she got to the point. My brother's tuition is overdue, she said. They're threatening to kick him out of school if we don't pay by Friday. It's 20,000 pesos. I know things have been tight for you, but I didn't know who else to ask. There it was. The real reason for the message, the meeting, the nice dress and the perfume and the smile that didn't reach her eyes. I looked at her hand on mine. I saw it clearly now, like a fog had lifted. Not affection, not connection, just calculation. She was doing the same math I'd been doing, figuring out if I was still worth the effort, if I had enough left to be useful. I can't help, I said quietly. She pulled her hand back. Can't or won't? Does it matter? I asked. She studied me for a moment. Then she nodded, stood up, grabbed her bag. I guess it doesn't. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't even look surprised. She just walked away. I watched her cross the food court, pull out her phone, start texting before she even reached the exit. By the time she disappeared into the mall crowd, she was probably already messaging the next prospect. I sat there for an hour, eating cheap pancit, watching Filipino families laugh together. I realized with absolute clarity that I was never part of anything here. I was just a temporary source of dollars in a country where dollars matter more than anything else. When the dollars stopped flowing, so did everything else. I booked a one-way flight to Brisbane. The ticket cost $800 USD, which hurt, but staying was going to cost me everything. I gave notice on my condo, sold the furniture I'd bought for almost nothing, packed my life into 2 suitcases. Everything I'd accumulated in 18 months fit into 2 bags. That felt symbolic somehow. The day before my flight, I took one last walk through Cebu. The city was beautiful. Colorful jeepneys streaming through the streets, locals smiling and laughing, warm tropical air, street food vendors calling out to pedestrians. I understood why I'd fallen for it, why thousands of expats fall for it. But beauty costs money to enjoy. You can't live on beauty. You can't eat it or rent a place with it. And when you don't have money, beauty just becomes a reminder of what you can't afford. At the airport the next morning, I saw other expats in the terminal. I could tell the difference now between those arriving and those leaving. The arriving ones had hope in their eyes, excitement, that same optimism I'd carried when I first landed. The departing ones looked broken, tired, older than their years. One older Australian man sat alone at the gate, waiting to board the same flight as me. We made eye contact and shared a knowing nod. But we didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We both knew the story. We'd both lived it. The flight was long, cramped, uncomfortable. I had a middle seat between a young couple who slept the entire way. I couldn't sleep. I thought about Maricel. I wondered if she'd even noticed I left. I doubted she was thinking about me at all. I thought about Doug, still in Cebu, still sharing that apartment, still eating street food, still aging in a country that didn't owe him anything. I thought about the men in the Facebook groups, still posting about exchange rates and price increases, still bleeding money, still hoping things would turn around. I'd gotten out before I was completely broke. That was something. I had about $10,000 USD left in savings. Not much, but enough to resettle. Enough to start over. That's what I told myself. Starting over at 62. Starting over broke, alone, and humiliated. My daughter Emma picked me up from Brisbane Airport. She was there at arrivals with a sign that said, "Welcome home, Dad," even though we both knew this wasn't a welcome. It was a rescue. She hugged me, didn't ask too many questions, which I was grateful for. In the car, she made small talk. "How was the flight? Are you tired? Do you want to stop for food?" I could tell she was holding back, that she had opinions and judgments and concerns, but she was kind enough not to voice them yet. She'd warned me before I left for the Philippines, not harshly but clearly. "Dad, just be careful. I read stories about older men getting taken advantage of over there." I'd brushed her off, told her I wasn't stupid, that I knew what I was doing, that not every Filipina was a scammer. I'd been defensive, righteous, certain. Now I was back and she didn't say, "I told you so." That made it worse somehow. My studio apartment was in a western suburb, a place called Inala. It was small, sterile, with beige walls and brown carpet, and a kitchenette that barely fit a stove and a sink. The air conditioning unit was old and loud, and I knew I couldn't afford to run it much. Emma had helped me set it up before I arrived. She'd bought some basic furniture from Gumtree, stocked the fridge with essentials, made the bed with sheets from Kmart. "I know it's not much," she said, "but it's a start." I thanked her. I didn't tell her it was more than I'd had in Cebu by the end. Everything in Australia cost more than I remembered. I went to Woolworths that first week and stood in the aisles, staring at prices, doing mental conversions I couldn't stop. Milk was $4.50, a loaf of bread was $3.80. Chicken breast was $13 per kilo. My pension, which had seemed so large when I was planning my escape to the Philippines, now felt suffocatingly small. I was back to budgeting every single dollar. But at least the prices were stable. At least there was no exchange rate eating me alive, no daily checking of currency apps with dread in my chest. At least I knew exactly how much my pension was worth. It didn't change based on global markets or inflation in another country. After 2 weeks of sitting in my apartment, applying for age pension supplements and watching daytime TV, I got a part-time job at Bunnings. 15 hours a week, helping customers, bagging purchases, moving stock. At 62, it was humbling. My co-workers were mostly teenagers, saving for university and retirees like me, who couldn't survive on the pension alone. The job paid $28 an hour, which added about $420 a week before tax. It was just enough to cover groceries and occasional small luxuries. A coffee out, a meal at a pub once a month. I joined a community center near my apartment and started playing lawn bowls on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Most of the people there were in their 70s, but they welcomed me. They didn't ask too many questions about where I'd been or why I was back. They just accepted me. We played bowls, had tea afterward, complained about Medicare wait times and the price of petrol. It was boring. But boring felt safe. Late at night, alone in my apartment with the windows open because I couldn't afford to run the air conditioning, I still thought about Cebu. Not about Maricel. I was clear-eyed about that now. She'd never loved me. Maybe she'd liked me for a while. Maybe she'd appreciated the security I provided, but it was never love. It was transaction. I thought about the version of myself who'd believed he could escape Australia's grinding poverty and find something better. That version of me seemed naive now, almost childishly optimistic. But I understood him. He was tired. He was lonely. He wanted to feel valuable again. He wanted to matter. The Philippines had given him that, at least for a while, until the math stopped working. 6 months after I returned, I got a Facebook message from Maricel. I'd forgotten to block her. The message was casual, friendly. Hey Graham, hope you're doing well. I wanted to let you know I'm engaged. I'm moving to California next year. There was a photo attached. Maricel smiling next to a heavy-set white man in his 70s at an expensive resort. The man had white hair, sunburned skin, and a smile that looked exactly like mine probably looked in those early photos I'd posted when I first met her. I stared at the photo for a long time. I didn't feel jealous. I didn't feel angry. I felt relieved. Relieved I wasn't that American. Relieved I wasn't still trapped in the cycle, still funding someone else's dream while my own savings evaporated. I typed a response. Congratulations. I wish you both happiness. Then I deleted it. I closed the message and blocked her profile. Not out of bitterness. Out of completion. That chapter was finished. It needed to stay finished. The exchange rate had taught me something brutal but true. Relationships built on financial disparity are always transactional, even when both people pretend they're not. The moment my dollars couldn't stretch far enough, the illusion shattered. I wondered if she ever actually liked me, or if it was always about the pension, the security, the promise of a better life. I'd never know. It didn't matter anymore. At Bunnings one Saturday, a young couple approached me in the timber section. They looked maybe 30, earnest and excited. "Excuse me, do you know about building decks?" the man asked. I spent 20 minutes helping them, calculated the materials they'd need, explained which timber would last longest in Brisbane's humidity, showed them cheaper alternatives that were just as good. I saved them maybe $300 with my advice. "Thank you so much," the woman said. "You probably just saved our project." It was a small moment, barely worth remembering, but it reminded me I had value beyond my bank account. I had skills, knowledge, experience, things that couldn't be measured in dollars or pesos. That's something I'd forgotten in the Philippines. On a Sunday morning, I sat in my small apartment drinking instant coffee, watching Australian news. There was a segment about pensioners struggling with the cost of living. They interviewed retirees working part-time jobs, talking about careful budgeting, sacrifices made. One woman said she hadn't bought new clothes in 3 years. One man said he'd given up his car to save on insurance and petrol. I recognized myself in every interview. Their lives weren't glamorous. They weren't Instagram-worthy or full of tropical beaches and beautiful young girlfriends. They were just trying to survive with dignity in an economy that had left them behind. But they were stable. Nobody's pension was evaporating through exchange rate fluctuations. Nobody was measuring their worth in devaluing currency. I thought about the expats still in Cebu, the ones who stayed because they were too broke to leave, too invested to admit defeat, or the ones who were genuinely in love and making it work despite the financial pressure. Those couples did exist. I'd seen them. Older foreigners married to Filipinas for 10, 20 years. Real partnerships where both people contributed, both people cared, both people built something together. My situation wasn't universal. It was just mine. I didn't judge the men who stayed. Everyone's gambling on something. My gamble didn't pay off. That's just reality. I pulled out my old spreadsheet, the one tracking my Philippine expenses, and opened a new one for my current life. Rent $320 per week, $1,387 per month. Utilities $180. Groceries $400. Transportation $120. Phone $40. Internet $60. My part-time income from Bunnings $5,400 per month after tax. My pension $500. Total income $2,900. Total expenses $1,287. That left me $713 per month for everything else. Medical expenses, clothing, entertainment, unexpected costs. It was tight. There was no room for vacations or luxuries. But there was no bleeding. I wasn't shrinking anymore. The numbers added up. The stability was boring, but boring was underrated when you'd experienced the alternative. One morning at Bunnings, an older customer asked me if I'd ever traveled to Asia. I was helping him choose screws for a home project. I lived in the Philippines for a while, I said. His eyes lit up. Really? I'm thinking about retiring there. Maybe Cebu or Dumaguete. What was it like? I paused, choosing my words carefully. I could have told him it was paradise, beautiful and affordable, and full of opportunity. I could have told him it was a scam, that every relationship is transactional, that he'd be robbed blind. Both answers would have been incomplete. It's beautiful, I said finally, but check the exchange rate trends before you commit. And make sure your budget has room for life to get more expensive, because it will. He laughed, waved off my concern. I've done my research. I'll be fine. I didn't push it. People need to learn their own lessons. I'd learned mine. I finished my shift, clocked out, drove home through familiar Brisbane streets. The city was grey and expensive, and full of people just trying to survive. Traffic was heavy. The sky was overcast. Everything felt mundane in a way it never felt in Cebu. But it was my grey, my expensive, my survival. I wasn't performing for anyone anymore. I wasn't converting myself into pesos, watching my value fluctuate with global markets. I wasn't measuring my worth by how much I could provide to someone who'd never see me as anything more than an income source. I was just Graham, a 62-year-old divorced carpenter, living modestly, working part-time at a hardware store, aging without pretense. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I boarded that flight to Cebu, full of hope and optimism and dreams of starting over. But it was real. And after everything, after the spreadsheets and the heartbreak and the slow realization that I'd been funding an illusion, reality was the only currency that held its value.